Hey folks, Matt here with Basemap, and today we're going to cover Wyoming. It's a state I love hunting because where else do you get to see tractor trailers blown over on their side from 80-mile-an-hour winds? Okay, let's dive in and talk about deadlines. First, there's a non-resident elk deadline that happens January 31st. So if you're non-resident, you want to hunt elk, you got to get your application in early. Moose, sheep, goat, and bison deadline is April 30th. And then your deer and pronghorn hunts for non-residents, that deadline is May 31st. And if you're a resident, you can wait to apply to an elk hunt all the way up to that May 31st deadline. Last thing to know is if you're just going to purchase a preference point, you can do that between July 1st and October 31st, to get ready for next year. Okay, so let's dive into the regulations, and what you're going to see is you're looking at those and how that translates into ultimately applying for the draw. First things first, if you're a resident and you want to hunt deer or elk, you have over-the-counter hunts, an over-the-counter license that you can simply purchase and hunt in a vast majority of the state. Obviously, your primo hunts still are going to be under the draw system, and we'll talk about how that is structured in a second. One of the things about Wyoming that's a little different than other states is you don't really see like a full regulations booklet published on the site. What you'll see is you can go and look at, let's say, all the antelope hunts and the regulations published for the antelope on the website, or you can use their mapping tool. But the way that the hunts are broken out is you will see a unit and a hunt type that are structured as a hunt code. And then you'll see the date and the species and the weapon type and the sex that you could use to hunt for that particular hunt code. Now, that hunt will typically limit you to that unit, and that type is defining what sex usually that you can harvest. Now, there is also like an archery license, I think that's a type 1 or 0. So make sure you understand those type codes as you go to apply. If you see a 6 or 7, that's a reduced price license that allows you to harvest either a doe, fawn, or cow calf if it's a elk license. And one thing to note is those hunts do not use preference points. So as we talk about the draw system here in a second, all of those hunts are going to be random draw, and I'll repeat that later so that that sticks in your noggin. All right, now, non-residents, one of the things that you need to know is there are two different groups when you're applying to deer, elk, and pronghorn hunts. There's kind of a general applicant group, and then there's the special applicant group. Now, the cost of applying between a general and a special is the cost difference is substantial. I think it's almost double now. And so really the only thing that happens if you apply in that special group is you pay more money. And the hope is that you'll get put in a pool that has fewer applicants, and that will increase your odds of drawing. That's not always the case, so you want to make sure you check the hunt planner or hunt score to see what the odds are. Okay, let's dive into the draw systems that are in place for allocating licenses across all these hunts. You can submit one application per species in Wyoming. So for deer, you can submit an application. Elk, you can submit an application. If you're a resident and you're applying to deer, elk, antelope, bison, or mountain goat, all of those draws are under a random draw system or lottery system. So in those systems, every applicant has the same odds of drawing as any other applicant for a hunt. There's no points, no preference given, anything like that. So it's easy peasy, very simple. You just simply take the total number of licenses available for a hunt divided by the number of applicants, and that's going to be your odds. If you're looking at a bighorn sheep hunt or a moose hunt, those hunts as residents use a combination of preference points and random draw. Now, why is it a combination? Well, the quota that's available for residents will be divided where 75% of those licenses will be awarded under the preference point system and 25% will be awarded randomly amongst the applicants. Now, the preference point portion gets drawn first, and the way that works is every year that you apply to the hunt and you're unsuccessful, or if you simply just choose not to apply and purchase a point during that point-only purchase window, You build up a point, and then the next year, if you decide to apply, that will give you preference over people that have fewer points. So when we actually go to do the draw, we rank order applicants by highest preference point to lowest preference point, and we'll simply start at the top, awarding out licenses until we run out of quota for that 75% of the quota. Now, for anybody who's left, who didn't draw a license in that preference point allocation, we'll then randomly give out the remaining 25% of licenses to any applicants left. So that's the way that system works. Keep that in mind if you're a non-resident listening to this, because that's going to apply to a lot of your hunts. Okay, now diving into non-residents next. For mountain goat and bison hunts, that's going to be a random draw. So easy peasy lottery system. Now, if you're applying to deer, elk, pronghorn hunts, those are going to use that preference point random draw split just like the resident ones. So same systems in place. The only thing that you need to remember here is remember how I talked about those type 6 or 7 licenses. So if you apply to one of those, it's not going to use preference point, right? The reduced price is going to be under a random draw. So that's a little quirk that you have to remember when you apply. The other thing you need to remember is that those 2 special groups are in place. So if you are applying as a general license to, let's say, a pronghorn hunt, then when we talk about the preference point portion, you have 75% of the quota that's available there. General, they will get 60% of the 75%. And then the special will get 40% of the 75%. So little split there to keep in mind. And then if you're applying to moose or sheep hunt as a non-resident, they're going to use, that same preference point random draw split. And there is no general special group there. It's just all general. So, okay. Now that I've confused you with the draw system, let's talk about the quotas. So you also see in those regulations, you'll see quotas listed, the total number of licenses available for a hunt. Now that quota gets split between the residency groups. So how does this work? Well, if it is a bison, sheep, moose, goat hunt, those are all under a 90-10 system where residents will get 90% of that quota, and non-residents could get 10% of the quota, or will get 10% of the quota. So that's the way that split works. Keep that in mind as you're applying. That'll tell you, just how big is that pool of available licenses. Now, if we're talking about elk, the way elk is split out is it's 16% for non-residents, 84% for residents. For deer and pronghorn, it's 80% for residents, 20% for non-residents. You can see that non-residents sometimes draw more than, let's say, that 20% for pronghorn. Now, why is this the case? Well, the way that the draw is structured is residents are drawn first, and let's say there's 100 pronghorn licenses for a particular hunt code. 80 licenses will be available for residents. And if there's only 74 resident applicants, that leaves 6 licenses left over. In Wyoming, they would take those 6 licenses and they would move them over to the non-resident quota. So now you'd have 20 plus 6, and you had 26 licenses available. If there were enough non-residents applying as their first choice to that hunt, all 26 licenses could get awarded, and then it would look like, you'd have 26% going to non-residents and 74% going to residents. So that's why you'll see some of those things show up in the stats. All right, the last thing is about choices. In Wyoming, you get to select up to 3 choices. If you're talking about, your moose, sheep, goat, bison hunts, there are no hunts that will go past the first choice. Everything, the full quota will be allocated in that first choice. If we're talking about elk, deer, and pronghorn hunts, you can have hunts where the quota is not fully allocated in the first choice. So, the second choice or third choice, you could be awarded your second or third choice as a license. So those are the things that you need to know for Wyoming when you apply this year. Good luck, and we'll see you in the field.